what appealed to me very much indeed, and that's very much in the spirit of Suren also, is the kind of spontaneous informality of this meeting. I myself, I was not involved in making a program. So every new day is a new surprise for me. And actually, the program was drawn up by the younger generation. Now, I must say the younger generation, as for me, starts with somewhere in the 60s down. As from somewhere in the 60s down, that to me is the young generation. But it was the young generation who developed this program. And so it was a great joy to hear and a surprise to hear everything which has been on offer. And as I say, that whole spirit of a kind of informality, which we so much enjoyed in Suren, that kind of togetherness, that I again found here in these days of these meetings as well. So let me thank also everyone. If you agree for 1 minute, let me thank all our other collaborators of today as well, in addition to Saraswati Inas. Of course, we have to thank all the dear family members who reminded us of Moldebach, Chausson, Baroda, Fasdina's birthplace. Of course, Petra Arte Schildbach gave that wonderful expose, which her husband gave at the opening of that of the meeting of that new building there, that new building, Moshe's birthplace, and all the gathering called in between. And so she, again, hearing those words really touched me very much. I found it a beautiful way. So I thank you for that contribution very much indeed. And then, of course, we had really the young generation of the family members, isn't it? The two, Tariq and Munaf, who have been very, very active in trying to get together these pictures. And of course, a certain lady not far removed from me spoke some texts which were, well, thank you, Aronissa, for that as well. There's some nice stories about it. And then, of course, also very great thanks to our contributors this afternoon, because I was so happy to hear how actually was asked unexpectedly for a second time, because there was such a great appeal to what he did yesterday, that Jalaluddin from Moscow again spoke about breath and the importance of breath in Sufi training. And of course, Moshe gave so many, on the one hand, lectures on the breath, in addition to the instructions in Sangatas and Sangitas, etc., on these practices. And so the fact that he reminded us of that, a very interesting thing, it might have struck you also, is that in the early days, when Moshe spoke about the Sufi yoga, and actually all these practices were sort of like advertised as being available to those people who wish to engage in that training. Whereas in a later development, everything extremely solemn and spiritually satisfied, and then you had to have so many initiations to get this practice and so many initiations to get that practice. It was completely solemnized into something, well, in those days, that was the fashion of the day, let us say. But the fact that today, again, we are open, all these things are more open, more available, of course, makes the whole presentation of Sufism that much more natural, rather than a bit artificially solemnized. So that is, I think, a great gain for our Sufism today. And I would really thank Jalaluddin very much for what he did, and express the hope that he would, inshallah, continue with this specialism in this field of the practices. It's wonderful when somebody assembles all the documentation of what Muhyiddin has said about it, what he thought about it, and everything that remains to be explained. So this was a wonderful experience we today again had. Then, of course, I would very much like to thank also Ani and Jabir, the two of them together, who gave us that wonderful expose of traditional Sufi music. And I was very happy with this formula which Ani developed, to give some explanation, some background explanation of that music in order to help us relate to it and learn more about how that Sufi tradition, that musical Sufi tradition, developed in the Turkish cultural world. I had not been aware before, for instance, that Yunus Emre and Haji Baktash and Jalaluddin Rumi and then, of course, Ibn Arabi, we all more or less, well, not exactly clustered together, but still belonged at the same wave in reaction to the horrible Mongol invasion and everything that happened there, as Sufism certainly surged in all directions. And how that, after that, of course, Sufism became organized in tariqat and so on, which had not been so much the case before. But how all this came together, that was a striking new element to me. Another thing which must have struck you also was that awareness that precisely in the Balkan, in Rumelia, that means in the Ottoman Balkan, that precisely these traditions had been retained so well. As Ali said, they were really preserved even better in the Balkans than they were in Anatolia. Very striking element. And in other words, that again helps us to realize that the Ottoman Empire, based mainly in the Balkans, was really a European culture, a distinct European culture, as the other great European traditions of the time were. And again, that music has been preserved in precisely these areas is a very striking information. I think I was not aware of to the same extent. So very enriching information we received, beautiful expressions, beautiful melodies, and something which I found a very enriching day today. So thank you all for your really very valuable, interesting, and hopefully abiding contributions. Then, dear fellow Murids of Hazrat Inayat Khan, I would read to you a lecture of Hazrat Inayat Khan, again from volume 6. And I must say, I rather admire the way in which the editor of these volumes, that was Ozan Abbas from Poland, how he managed to collect a number of lectures. It's not chronological build-up, it is thematic build-up. And so how he managed to have numbers of lectures in which Murshid really deals in the same way, but with very varied approaches. Murshid deals with a particular theme again and again. And those lectures he has brought together. So what I'm going to read you tonight is a comparatively short lecture, but where again the same themes which ran through the previous lectures we read, and like a kind of red thread that comes back. And that's a wonderful thing, but in that way, it's of course only one of the very rich themes which we should deal with. But that particular theme, recurring constantly, does help one to really to take that in and to keep it with one and to allow it to accompany that in one's conscience more or less permanently. So what I'm going to read to you is the second of the lectures entitled From Limitation to Perfection. And if after that there's some time left, I could still maybe read a few fragments of the earlier lecture under that title. But now to begin with, From Limitation to Perfection, the second lecture on the subject. Every kind of striving in man's life, whether for a material or for a spiritual object, is the result of his natural inclination to reach from limitation towards perfection. Whatever it may be, wealth or rank or name or comfort or pleasure, it is this limitation which keeps man discontented. Also, in all his learning, studying, practicing, acquiring, attaining, we see this same striving to go from limitation to perfection. The saying of the scriptures that God alone is rich and all others are poor can be seen in everyday life. The greater the riches one has, the more one wants. And it is interesting to find, when observing the life of a poor person, that he is more content with what he has than a rich person with all his wealth. Sometimes one also sees that a poor person is more generous in his giving than a rich person in parting with his possessions. When we look at another aspect of life, we see that a person who is learned in a small degree believes that he has learned and read a great deal, and he wishes to show it. Whereas someone who has learned more begins to discover that it is really very little, and that there is still very much more to be learned. There is still another picture to be seen, that of the foolish and the wise. The foolish man is ready to teach you without a moment's thought, ready to correct you, ready to judge you, ready to form an opinion about you. But the wiser a man, the more diffident he is to form an opinion about you, to judge you, to correct you. Now, what does this mean? It means that whatever man possesses in a small degree, he thinks he has so much of it. But when he possesses more, he begins to feel the need and the desire for perfection, for completion. There is an ancient story of a king who wanted to grant a dervish his desire. And the desire of the dervish was to fill his cup with golden coins. The king thought that it would be the easiest thing in the world to fill the cup of the dervish. But when they tried to fill it, it proved to be a magic cup. It would not fill. The more money was poured into it, the emptier it became. And the king was very disappointed and disheartened at the thought that this cup could not be filled. The dervish said, "Your Majesty, if you cannot fill my cup, you only have to say so, and I will take my cup back. I am a dervish, and I will go, and I will only think that you have not kept your word." The sovereign, with every good intention, with all his generosity, and with all his treasures, could not fill that cup. And he asked Dervish, "Tell me what secret you have in this cup. It does not seem to be natural. There is some magic about it. Tell me, what is its secret?" The dervish answered, "Yes, Your Majesty. What you have found out is true. It is a magic cup, but it is the cup of every heart. It is the heart of man which is never content. Fill it with whatever you may. Fill it with wealth, with attention, with love, with knowledge, with all there is. It will never fill, for it is not meant to be filled. Not knowing this secret of life, man goes on in pursuit of every object, or any object he has before him, continually. And the more he gets what he wants, and the cup of his desire is never filled. The meaning of this is that it can be understood by the study of the soul. Man's appetite is satisfied by food, but behind it is an appetite which is the appetite of the soul, and that appetite is never satisfied. That appetite is at the back of all the different forms of hunger and of thirst. And since a man cannot trace that innermost appetite, he strives all through life to satisfy these outer appetites, which are satisfied and yet remain unsatisfied. If someone is making a study of objective things, things of the objective world, he may gain a great deal of knowledge about them, and yet there is never an end to it. The one who searches the secret of sound, the one who searches the mystery of light, the one who searches the mystery of science, they all search and search and search, and there is never an end to it, nor is there ever satisfaction. And the thoughtful person wonders if that satisfaction is to be found anywhere, the satisfaction which, so to speak, fulfills the promise of the soul. Indeed, there does exist a possibility for that satisfaction, and that possibility is to attain to the perfection which is not dependent on outside things, a perfection which belongs to one's own being. That satisfaction is not attained, it is discovered. It is in the discovery of this satisfaction that the purpose of life can be fulfilled. And now the question arises, how does one arrive at this perfection? Religion, philosophy, and mysticism will all help one, but it is the actual attainment of this knowledge that one will arrive at this satisfaction. It is by the actual attainment of this knowledge that one will arrive at this satisfaction. Life can be pictured as a line with two ends. One end of the line is limitation, the other end of the same line is perfection. As long as one is looking at the end, which is limitation, however good, virtuous, righteous, or pious one is, one has not touched what may be called perfection. Are there not many believers in religion, in a God? There are many worshippers of a deity, and more among simple people than among the intellectuals and the educated. Do they all arrive at perfection before leaving this earth by their belief in a deity or by their worship? There are others who learn from books. I have known some people who had written 50 or 100 books themselves and had read maybe a whole library. Yet they still remain standing in the same place where they were. As long as one's face is not turned away from that end, which is the end of limitation, and as long as one does not look towards the ideal of perfection, which is the real Kaaba or place of pilgrimage, one will not arrive at that perfection. What keeps this perfection, which belongs to his own life, which is his own being, hidden from man? A screen put before it. And that screen is one's self. The soul, conscious only of its limitation, of its possessions with which it identifies itself, forgets its own being and becomes, so to speak, the captive of its limitation. Religion or belief in God, worship, philosophy, and mysticism all help one to attain this. But if one does not search for perfection through these, even they will only be an occupation, a pastime, and will not bring man to the right goal. Is there any definition of this perfection? What sort of perfection is it? Can it be explained in any way? It is only perfection itself which can realize itself. It cannot be put into words. It cannot be explained. If anyone believes that truth can be given in words, he is very much mistaken. It is just like putting seawater in a bottle and then saying, here is the sea. Very often people ask, but what is the truth? Can you explain it? Words cannot explain it. Often I thought it would be a good thing to write the word truth on a brick and give it into the hands of such a person and say, hold it fast. Here is the truth. There is a great difference between fact and truth. Fact is a shadow of truth. Fact is intelligible, but the truth is beyond comprehension, for truth is unlimited. Truth knows itself, and nothing else can explain it. What little explanation can be given lies in the idea of expansion. There's a man who toils all day in order to gain his livelihood, to give himself a little comfort or a little pleasure, and so life goes on. And there's another man who has a family, who has others to think about, who works for them. Sometimes he forgets his own pleasure and comfort for the comfort and pleasure of those who depend upon him. He hardly has time to think about his own comfort or about himself. His pleasure is the pleasure of those who depend upon him. His comfort is in their comfort. And there is still another man who tries to be useful to his town, to improve his condition, to help the education of the people of his town. He is engaged in this work, and very often he forgets himself in striving for the happiness of those for whom he is working. Then there are also those who live for their nation, who work for their nation, who give their whole life to it. They are only conscious of their nation. The consciousness of the latter is expanded. It becomes larger. There is very little difference in the size of man's frames, but there is a great difference in the expansion of man's consciousness. There is one man who seems as large as he actually is. There's another who seems as large as his family. Another who seems as large as his town. Another who seems as large as his nation. And so there are men who are as large as the world. There is a saying of a Hindustani poet, neither the sea nor the land can be compared with the heart of man. If the heart of man is large, it is larger than the universe. Therefore, if perfection can be explained in any terms, if perfection can be defined, it is in the expansion of man's consciousness. The man who strives after this perfection need not know or learn what is selfish or unselfish. Unselfishness comes to him naturally. He becomes unselfish. In the last few years, humanity has gone through a great catastrophe. All nations have suffered and have shared in it. Every individual, even every living creature on this earth, has been affected by it. And one might ask, what was lacking? Was education lacking? There are many schools and universities. Was religion lacking? There are many churches still, and many different beliefs still exist in the world. What was lacking was the understanding of the true meaning of religion. What was lacking was the understanding of the real meaning of education. Those who have found out that perfection is attained by realizing the self within have not attained it only by what man calls external worship. It was by self-abnegation that in the true sense of the word. It is by going into that silence where one can forget the limitations of the self, that one can get in touch with that part of one's being which is called perfection. And this can best be attained by those who have realized the meaning of life. I will read this wonderful peroration once more. Those who have found out that perfection is attained by realizing the self within have not attained it only by what man calls external worship. It was by self-abnegation that in the true sense of the word. It is by going into that silence where one can forget the limitations of the self, and that one can get in touch with that part of one's being which is called perfection. And this can best be attained by those who have realized the meaning of life. Just to supplement these brief words, wonderful words, the brief ones, let me read to you, to round this off, the passage from the earlier lecture from Limitation to Perfection, where Moshe again comes back to the theme we have been dealing with in previous days, that of self-realization. And here Moshe says the following: the fifth aspect of religion is self-realization. This is the highest aspect, and everything we do leads to it. Prayers, concentration, good actions, good thoughts. And how is it gained? Some say we realize God by self-realization. But it is not so, for we can only realize self by the realization of God. Whenever one tries to realize the self when omitting God, one makes a mistake. It is very difficult for man to realize his true self, because the self he knows is the most limited self. The self to which he has awakened from the time of his birth, the self which has made within him a conception of himself, and it is most limited. However proud and conceited he may be, however good his idea of himself, yet in his innermost being, he knows his limitation, knows the smallness of his being. He may be a most successful general, or he may be a king, but he discovers his limitation when the time comes for him to lose his kingdom. And then he knows that he is not really a king. Earthly greatness does not make him great. If there is anything that can make him great, it is only the effacing of himself and the establishing of God instead. The one who wants to begin with self-realization may have many intellectual and philosophical principles, but he will get into a muddle and arrive nowhere. These are the wrong methods. Then there are people who say, I am God. This is insolence, stupidity. It is foolish to say such things. They insult the greatest ideal that the prophets and saviors of humanity have always respected. Such people can never reach spiritual perfection. In order to reach spiritual perfection, the first thing is to destroy this false self. First, this delusion must be destroyed. And this is done by the ways taught by the great teachers, ways of concentration and meditation, by the power of which one forgets oneself and removes one's consciousness from oneself. In other words, rises from one's limited being. In this way, a person effaces himself from his own consciousness and places God in his consciousness instead of his limited self. And it is in this way that he arrives at that perfection for which every soul is seeking. That were Moshe's words for today. So I suppose the best continuation of these wonderful words is to focus on the music, the Ilais and the Zikr, which Mehmet and Ali Ungan will now be giving us.